Today we have one of the most anticipated cameras of the year. This is the long-awaited Sony A7 IV. Designed around a brand new 33 megapixel full-frame sensor and the latest Bionz XR processor, this is a major upgrade from the A7 III. Burst shooting up to 10 frames per second, new real-time tracking autofocus modes for the AI-driven IAF, for both stills and video. Video has a huge upgrade, including 10-bit 60p in Super 35. We also get new features introduced here, such as focus breathing compensation, focus maps, live streaming. There is a lot to unpack in this video. When Sony introduced the A7 III back in 2018, they referred to it as the basic model. So now we have the new basic model. So a lot of this video, I'm going to be comparing this clearly to the A7 III, but we've also had cameras that have come out since, such as the Alpha 1 or the A7S III. And so this camera is interesting because it certainly is an upgrade from the previous model, and it brings in a lot of the features that you're going to find on slightly more high-end cameras, and it also has some very unique features that, at least at this point, are only available on the A7 IV. So let's dig down and talk about this. So the A7 IV is essentially the same body that we have on the A7S III. We've got the fully articulating screen. It even has the same heat dissipating structure, so you shouldn't have any overheating issues during video recording. There is a physical difference in the assist notch that opens the display. So on the A7 IV, you see this on the bottom. On the A7S III, it is on the top. We also have a new combination mode selection dial. So this is on the top of the camera. There's a lock release for the bottom part of the dial, but this allows you to change between stills mode, movie mode, and S&Q modes. On the top, you have your standard mode selection switch. Another interesting change that we haven't seen in a long time on a Sony camera is the back exposure compensation dial. So you're going to see that it's actually blank on the A7 IV. What's cool about this is this allows you to customize all of the dials in any configuration that you want. So for instance, if you're a video shooter and you don't really use exposure compensation that much and you'd rather have that mapped to ISO, you can do that. The other cool thing is there's actually 4 dials on this because you have the rear dial as well on the back of the camera. So you can map this to pretty much any configuration you want. If you want ISO on the front dial and then you want aperture and shutter speed next to each other, you can do that. You can even map white balance to any of these dials. So this gives you a lot more flexibility and customization in the body design. This is something that we saw on the NEX7, which was a camera I bought a long time ago. I still have mine, and I have it converted to be an infrared camera at this point, but it had 2 blank dials, and I love the fact that you could assign them to different things. So when you combine this with the fact that now we have independent settings that can be saved between switching between video and stills mode, and the fact that we have also our 3 custom memory settings, there's a lot of flexibility that you now have, not only with the internals on the camera, but with the physical buttons as well. The A7 IV features 1 dual function card slot, which is slot 1. You can use CF Express Type A or UHS-2 SD cards. The second is SD only. And for those of you who use CF Express Type A cards, much like the A1, there is an option before you format the card to do a quick format or a slow format. This is a feature not yet available on the A7S III and is a major time saver. The viewfinder has been upgraded from the A7 III. This is now a 3.6 million dot OLED quad VGA viewfinder, and it is capable of rendering at 120 frames per second. Now, while this is an upgrade, it's still not the same viewfinder that you're going to find on the A7S III, even though the bodies look similar. That one has a 9 million dot viewfinder, but still 3.68 or so is a welcome upgrade. So the A7 IV is designed around a brand new full-frame 33 megapixel backside illuminated sensor. So if you're coming from the A7 III, this is going to give you a substantial boost in resolution. It also features the latest generation Bionz XR processor. This is the same one that you're going to find in the A1 and the A7S III. So you can expect improved color as well as improved autofocus algorithms. Now, another advantage over the A7 III, we finally have the new menus with touch capability. There are 2 new tabs in here. We have a USB streaming tab, which is going to control some settings for streaming, which I will get into later. And we also have an accessibility tab. So if you want to turn this on and have the camera read all the settings to you,
set up tab, accessibility group, screen reader.
You can also control the speed. I'm sure somebody's going to find that useful. The A7 IV has 759 phase detection autofocus points that are going to give you 94% coverage of the frame. Of course, we also have the real-time AI-based autofocus modes, so it's human, animal, and now bird IAF. And we have these in both stills mode and video mode. If you recall, the A7 III did not have IAF and video, so not only do we have that, but we have 2 additional modes as well. Not bad. The difference in autofocus between the A7 III and the new A7 IV, well, they're different in 3 different ways. So first of all, with the A7 III, we had what was called lock-on tracking, which was pretty decent, but now this has been upgraded to the same autofocus system that you're going to find in the A1, the A7S III, which is the real-time autofocus tracking. In addition, this gives you the expand flexible spot tracking. The A7 IV features an improved 5-axis image stabilization for what Sony are saying is a 5.5-step advantage. I have noticed that this is slightly improved when shooting stills. I think for video, if you really want steady motion, you're gonna probably have to go to a gimbal or use the gyroscope data that you can import into Catalyst Browse. That works really well. This camera gives us continuous shooting speeds up to 10 frames per second. It also features an 828 image buffer that is shooting uncompressed RAW plus JPEG. Sony has also announced 2 flash units. There's the HVL46RM as well as the HVL60RM. Seriously, what is up with these names? These flashes feature PTTL metering for each individual frame when you're doing burst shooting. So when you have a flash that is capable of doing burst shooting, one of the tricks around it usually is to meter the first frame and then follow the same meter settings for each frame while the burst shoot is going on. This one actually does it on a frame per frame level, which is very cool. Now, with this flash, this is the 46RM, and that 46 is actually the guide number. So they're not high guide numbers. If you need more power, you're going to have to add more flashes. But the workaround there is these are flashes that are designed for high-speed functionality, not only on the A7 IV, but also on the A1. And it is weird to see this in action, especially on the A1 when you're using an electronic shutter. What's really impressive are the specs on these. So the 46RM is going to give you 60 flashes at 10 frames per second. You're going to get 320 flashes before you need to recycle. The recycle time is 2 seconds. So let's talk about low light performance on the A7 IV. So this was a little bit of a concern when I realized this was a 33 megapixel sensor. The previous model, the A7 III, was 24 megapixels. So more megapixels, the more photosites you have on the sensor, it affects the pixel pitch and it can affect the low light performance. I will say that this is also subjective because first of all, this will vary depending on what scene you're shooting. So noise tends to hide in shadows, so therefore a higher contrast image might have a different feel to it at a higher ISO setting than something that's lower contrast. The other thing is that I'm filming this video before this camera's even out, so nothing really supports the RAW files except Sony's Imaging Edge, and actually Luminar AI will open these files as well. But my point being is that I have not seen RAW files in either Lightroom or Capture One, which are the editors that I'm most used to. So I don't really feel comfortable judging the performance at this point, but I will say that it actually does pretty well. So you can easily get up to 6400 very comfortably. It's when you start pushing it further. So for me, 12,800 is really the furthest that I want to push this. And by the way, that is actually the top of the line for the default setting. When you're in auto ISO, you can increase that, but that's where the camera comes stock. Of course, the top ISO is 51,200, and you can push this all the way up to 4,800. Don't really recommend that for most cases. Things get pretty crunchy. But I would say for general use, particularly if you're comparing this with something like the A7 III, that you're going to expect about the same high ISO performance, even though we have more megapixels on the sensor. That actually is a huge plus. A lot of that probably has to do with the processor that's in here. Sony did a nice job. Let's talk a little bit about video. So you have up to 4K 30p, and it's oversampled from 7K in full frame readout without any pixel binning. Now this camera will also do 4K 60p if you want to use this in S&Q, shoot slow motion. It does it in Super 35, so there is a crop, but the readout is oversampled from 4.6K, and it doesn't use any pixel binning either. Both modes look extremely good. Some of you may remember on the A7 III that there was a slight crop when you were in 30p. The only way to get full frame was actually to shoot at 24 4P, and so that's been worked out now. You can shoot full frame up to 30p. It also features S-Cinetone, so if you want a cinematic look, you don't want to grade, you can use this in the camera. So there's a thing called dual ISO. Now, Sony have publicly stated that the A7S III did not have dual ISO, and I remember my friend Gerald Undone did a whole video on that describing it. So basically what the concept of dual ISO is that you have a second gain stage that kicks in, and on the A7S III, this was at 12,800. So let me just show you a little test. This is video footage that was shot with the lens cap on the camera. So all you're seeing is the noise as I raise the ISO. So when we get up to ISO 10,000, you can see a considerable amount of noise in the picture. But if I raise this 1/3 of a stop right to 12,800, it cleans up. And so that's presumably where the second gain stage is kicking in. So when I tested the A7 IV, we still see this is just very different. So first of all, S-Log3 allows you to start at 200 ISO. So when we get up to 2,500, you're going to see that there is a little bit of noise and the breaking point is at 3,200. So I was interested in seeing how these two cameras compared when we're up at the A7S III's dual ISO point of 12,800. We're looking at these with the lens cap on. This is just showing you the noise. So how does this look in a real world situation? So I had a little still life set up back here. I did some low light footage of this, and you can see that at 12,800, it's still very usable on the A7 IV. There is a little bit of noise, and you can see that the A7S III is slightly cleaner. Now, it's when you move up in ISO that you're going to start noticing a big difference. The breaking point for me is about 25,600. This is when noise is starting to be a little too noticeable in the image. This is such a ridiculously crazy high ISO setting, and that's one of the benefits to using S-Log3 is that you can actually achieve that. And of course, noise hides in shadows, so you want to expose to the right, which ends up being a couple stops over normal exposure most of the time. But there's clearly still a use case for the A7S III. I will not be selling mine anytime soon, but having said that, I think that the A7 IV holds up really well. And when you consider how ridiculous an ISO that is, if you're the kind of person who shoots video and most of the time things are well lit, I think that this is an excellent performer. Another one of my favorite options on the newer Sony cameras is the inclusion of the digital audio interface. This means you can use a microphone like the ECM B1. There are other interfaces as well. You can pop these in the hot shoe, and there is no need to power these mics or no need to have any cables. Everything is done through the hot shoe. So let's talk about a few new features on the A7 IV that are unique to the A7 IV. So the first one I want to talk about is focus breathing compensation. So focus breathing occurs in lenses when usually you're shooting videos where you're going to notice it because you have the time element. And let's say you're rack focusing between something that is close to the camera, something that is far away. You can see in this example, when I change the focus from near to far, it actually breathes. In other words, the focal length appears to change. Everything shrinks on one end and it expands when it goes to the other. And so this is something that can be quite irritating for a lot of people who want to shoot video, but these are lenses that were designed for still photography. Well, we now have breathing compensation. And so the way this works is it's going to use the clear zoom area, which is essentially a small safety crop in 4K. So yes, there is a crop involved, and this only works with native Sony lenses. And so what it does is it takes lens readout data from the lens as it's focusing and adjusts the crop in real time. And so the result is that you don't notice anything. And you can see from these examples, it pretty much corrects it. Another new feature is something that Sony call Focus Map. So this feature is only available in movie mode, and it's something that I tie to one of the keys on the camera. So I can press the button and it turns on the focus map. This is a focus aid, and what it does is it gives you a lot of data about what's in or not in focus. So essentially any area that is clear in this image is what's in focus. The orange area shows you what's out of focus between the subject and the camera, and the blue area is what's out of focus after the subject and beyond. And so this is a really handy tool. This is something that's been available on a couple select high-end add-on units that focus pullers will use, but it gives you a lot more information than what you get out of just using focus peaking or something like that. This is actually a feature that I wouldn't mind seeing in stills mode. It's not that I would use it when doing portraits or even street photography, but it's something that I would use when doing landscapes. Focus peaking is cool, but it only shows you what's in focus, and sometimes you want to be able to get information about what's out of focus. And so I think for still lives, for landscape, I think it would be a useful feature. Right now, it's only available in video mode, but it's pretty cool. There's also two new features that are extremely useful in the playback index. So the first one is the ability to use what we call a divider frame. So anytime you have a group of shots and maybe you want to separate separate those out? Well, we can create one of these divider frames. And so to access this, you're going to have to set it up and you're going to have to assign it to one of the keys on the camera. So I have mine just in the middle of the dial on the back. And so you invoke this after you've shot the last frame. So this is not perfect, but once you've shot the last frame, let's say you're going to switch lenses or something like that, you can press the button. It will put the divider frame in. Now, the unfortunate side of this is you have to do it after that last shot. In other words, you can't move the divider frame around. In fact, essentially, it's pretty much just a blank image. It's a JPEG, so it gets an image number as well. And so that is better than nothing at all, but it is there if you want it. The second feature is when you're looking through any movie is you have the ability now to have two different sets of markers. Now, at the moment I'm filming this, these are really only useful if you're using Catalyst Browse, but if you're using video and you're uploading it to a server or you're shooting in real time, let's say you're shooting sports or something, and you want to mark where individual shots are along a clip, you now have a way to do it. Yet another feature that is unique to the A7 IV is its live streaming capabilities. And I'm going to be really honest with you, this is a feature that I've seen other camera manufacturers implement with their models, and it's just something I've never been that excited about. The quality isn't that good, and I've always been the guy who runs the HDMI out with the capture card, and that's how I do live streaming for either Zoom meetings or I do it for YouTube, whatever that is. And so one thing that I'm pleasantly surprised on here is the image quality. The other thing that I'm pleasantly surprised on here is how easy it is to do. Anytime you connect a Sony camera via USB to do anything, it tends to be this game of going through the settings and being confused and scratching your head and trying things, and finally you get it to work. Well, it couldn't be easier. So the way this works is if you have this set up, you can just simply plug a USB-C cable into the camera. You plug the other end into your computer, and the first screen that comes up gives you an option menu, and you select live streaming. That's it. Then you go into Zoom, you go into any application, and it's going to recognize the camera as a video input. Not only that, but we also have audio that comes over the video input, so you can use the hot shoe enabled devices, whether that's the microphone, it could be the XLR input, you might use a lav or something like that, and this allows you to have a really good connection. The quality is amazing. And another thing that's actually really useful is you can actually record internally on the camera at the same time you're doing a live stream. So if the live stream got interrupted for some reason, or maybe you're the kind of person you stream something on YouTube, then you want to be able to put it on Facebook or Instagram or something else later, then you have a backup copy, and the formats can be mixed. So for instance, the formats that you're going to go out to for the streaming are going to be streaming friendly. Like it'll do 4K, but it's down at 15 frames a second. I opt for HD 1080 at 30 frames a second. That tends to work pretty well with my connection. You can also go down to 720 if you need to have a little more bandwidth there. But then I can record internally at 4K. Now, I don't think this would work for something like a Zoom meeting, that it won't record both sides of the conversation, but if you're doing a presentation or you have a YouTube channel or something like that and you want to be able to reuse a better quality version of that footage later, it's really nice to be able to record that in camera. So now let's talk about the price of this camera. So at the time I'm filming this video, I have a range of what the price will be, but I don't have the exact price. I will put that in the show description by the time this video launches, so you can check down there. I do know, however, that range, it's going to be higher and more expensive than the A7 III was at launch. Consider for a minute where this camera lives in Sony's product lineup. So this is the tier that includes things like the A7 III, the A7C, now the A7 IV. And when you consider this is going to be a $2,500 camera for somebody who's serious, they want to have a full frame camera that has the best of both worlds in terms of a hybrid system. They want to be able to get amazing still photography, be able to have a lot of flexibility in video shooting. Well, this is going to give you exactly that. You've got the autofocus basically from the A1. You've got enough speed in the camera, even though it's not a dual stack CMOS configuration, and you have some of the high-end video features from the A7S III. The only advantage there is going to be super low light, high ISOs, as well as high frame rates. But depending on your needs as a photographer, I think that this body is going to fulfill exactly what a lot of people are looking for. I think this is going to be a big seller for Sony. I would love to know what you guys think. I'm sure you're going to tell me, so leave me a comment below. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.